Some people might not like me saying this, but I think a lot of people turning to psychedelics are actually just spiritually bypassing. Let's have a conversation. Welcome to the channel, everyone. My name is Fola, and here on Deep Mind Squared, we talk all things bridging mental wellness and spirituality for nurses. I wanted to come on here and talk about this concept of turning to psychedelics, plant medicines, or other forms of altered states through like breathwork and other shamanic practices. And the idea that sometimes people are turning to these forms of altered states to kind of just avoid the rest of their life situation and some of those kind of heavier emotions that might be coming up. And this might be a little controversial. I'm okay with sharing this. It's just my sort of observations lately. And I'm curious to hear what you think, so feel free at any point to share your comments too. Before we get into any of that, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you're updated on future video releases. Here in this day and age, we are coming to a place where more and more people are turning to different forms of plants, people journeying to Peru, to other countries, or even here in Edmonton. I know there's lots of these like pop-up places to do ayahuasca and all this sort of thing. Different forms of plant medicines and retreat centers and all that fun stuff. And that's great. It's neat to see how these medicines are starting to really reach like a larger population of people. But there's something that I'm noticing amongst a lot of sort of the psychedelic groups, and I just feel it's really important to talk about. I was going through a book recently called Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness by David Treleaven, I believe is his name. And in his book, he talks about how people go through sometimes these challenges through meditation where they are experiencing traumatic sort of events or reliving trauma, or they just can't dive into a deeper state of consciousness because of these past traumas. And there's an important need for us to have a trauma-informed approach through meditation, especially if we were like guiding people through meditation. But I was kind of relating it to the concept of, in his book, he highlights there are times where people who've been practicing meditation for like 20 plus years start to realize that they were just using meditation as a way to avoid trauma, and it was a form of dissociation. So within trauma, there sometimes can be, a lot of times actually, this experience where people basically separate from their physical body or their awareness within like the physical environment. And this is a form of like safety mechanism, a way to ensure, because it's supported maybe in a very dangerous sort of situation, a way to protect our physical body and our mental, emotional well-being. And so this dissociation can happen, especially at a young age, if trauma's happened in your childhood, where then people continue to kind of experience those dissociations, and oftentimes without even knowing. My own experience with that is being very like spacey, I guess. It's part of my body structure as a schizoid body structure. I'll talk about that in another video perhaps. But there is a way in which we can like show up and then dissociate because it's just feels more comfortable. We know what it feels like. It helps us to kind of protect ourselves. But until I went through like some of the more intensive trauma therapies like EMDR, I didn't realize how much I was doing this dissociation at that point, because you really start to become aware of that separation. So I'm saying this because I feel like there's a connection between that and the psychedelics. Like psychedelics, plant medicines, in some of these very intensive forms of altered state practices, we begin to create a separation from like our physical body. And for those people who maybe have trauma that's underlying or repressed, maybe something that they're not really wanting to look at because it just doesn't feel safe, then it feels better to continually dissociate. And so this is my thoughts when it comes to people who might be turning to a lot of psychedelic use. Again, it's about us having a conscious sort of intentional practice. And what does that look like? I mean, everyone needs to figure out their own sort of dosing schedule, right? But really being mindful of how often someone is dosing, how often are they turning to these plants? Someone had shared with me a story about attending one of these ayahuasca ceremonies where someone had said that they'd come like 100 times to do ayahuasca. I don't even know if that's possible. Maybe it was an exaggeration. But that seemed a little excessive, even to me. My thoughts. Why, right? Like, why? And at that point, like, shouldn't the medicine be doing something for you? I'm not here to judge people's experiences. But it can come to a point where I feel people are turning to these plants, turning to psychedelics, trying to escape the pain and the suffering. Because again, I understand it's a challenge, right? It's easier for us to turn to something else to distract us. But within this conversation, I'm not talking about using social media or playing games or binge watching like shows on TV or whatever. I'm talking specifically about plant medicines, about psychedelics, and how there is that potential to turn to it to avoid the pain of our life. And I think, again, this comes to then doing the integration work, which I shared in the other video. I'll tag it here. And also really acknowledging and setting intention as to why we are going into a ceremony or going into meditation, whatever it might be. And asking yourself, like, am I trying to avoid something by going into these spaces? Because you truly have the answers for yourself, no one else. And I think sometimes we might want to avoid hearing those truths because trauma is not easy. It's not fun. And sometimes those, having gone through EMDR and moving through some pretty heavy traumas, it's not pleasant. Like, it's not something that, you start to feel the sense of not wanting to move forward into healing that, because it really does feel unsafe, and it's really hits these really deep parts of our being. So wherever you might be right now or experiencing, I just invite you to be patient with yourself as you go through that process, and no judgment for you or for anyone. Just hold yourself in that neutral lens and that compassionate lens, understanding that you're learning exactly what you need to. Let's see, how can we make the use of plant medicines, psychedelics, more sustainable? And I think this is a huge part of that. So feel free to share and like this video with anyone you think might be interested, and I will catch you all in another video. Take care.